So we can start. Nice to see all of you on the seminar devoted to the partnership between Ukraine and East African countries. And I'm glad to see all of you. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Pavlo Martyshev. I am researcher at the Center of Land and Food Use Research at Kyiv School of Economics, shortly at KSE Agrocenter. And I am specializing on food markets, on grain market, on food security, on agri-food policy. And over the last few months, I'm a little bit involved into investigation of African markets. So this is our new initiative. So, let me introduce Dr. Mariia Bogonos, who is the head of KSE Agrocenter, and she is specializing in agricultural modeling, in applied research on agri-food markets, and on the EU integration of Ukrainian agriculture. And also we have a number of speakers today. The next speaker is Artem Gudkov, a director of the state-owned enterprise Ukrainian-African Trade Mission, created by the Ministry of Agriculture. And the enterprise is aimed to facilitate business relations between Ukrainian and African business. And besides, Artem has a huge practical experience in doing business in Africa. He is also a CEO of global Ukrainian distribution, investment and trading company, Gudkov company. And the company specialization is investment and trading activities in a number of African countries. Also, I want to introduce his colleague and co-founder of Gudkov company, Rita Polishuk. Rita also has extensive experience in making business in African states, and besides, she participated in consulting projects for FAO, UN, and the Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine. Also, our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Pomunyo, the regional director for Central and West Africa at the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, located in Washington. And Dr. Pomunyo is one of the first ambassadors of Grain from Ukraine initiative, the humanitarian program organized by Ukrainian government to provide food aid for low-income countries. Also, I'm glad to introduce Vladyslav Vlasiuk, advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. And Vladyslav is actively contributing to the implementation of the Grain from Ukraine initiative. The next speaker is Dr. Heinz Strubenhoff, who is a senior consultant to a number of investment organizations, the European Commission, German government, European Investment Bank. And in particular, Dr. Strubenhoff is a voting member of the investment committee in the Africa Agriculture and Trade Investment Fund, dedicated to uplift Africa's agricultural potential. Also, I want to welcome our speakers from East African countries, Dr. Makarios Ndemu, the director of the Institute of Human Settlement Studies at RD University in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Dr. Ndemu's specialization is agricultural research and sustainable agriculture in African countries. Also, we have the speaker from Ethiopia, Dr. Abule Mehare. He is director of partnership and communication division of Ethiopian Economic Association. And Dr. Mehare has extensive experience in agricultural economics. His research works are devoted to the agricultural and rural development in Ethiopia and other African countries. So, first of all, Mariia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pavlo. Good afternoon. In Ukraine, it is afternoon. I believe we are from several time zones here. In any case, I am very honored to welcome the distinguished speakers and the distinguished guests to this seminar. The organization of this seminar and the research that has been done by the KSE Agrocenter team is extremely timely and is extremely valuable. And I'm so delighted to see the experts and the stakeholders that have gathered here today to discuss the very important aspects of cooperation between Ukraine and countries from East Africa. As we begin our discussion, I would like to acknowledge the challenging context in which we all are today due to the unprovoked and ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine. For many years, Ukraine has been established as a leading exporter of grain and other foodstuffs around the globe, including to African continent. The war has brought challenges to the entire economy and to the agri-food production in Ukraine in particular by challenging the production itself as well as challenging our export routes. And the negative impacts of these challenges have been felt around the globe directly through the declined food supplies, as well as indirectly through the increased food prices, as well as increased food inflation. In the face of these challenges, Ukraine continues to commit itself to supplying food and grains to those who are in need, in particular with its initiative, Grain from Ukraine. It's a humanitarian program, and it has been launched, it has been launched in the midst of the conflict, and it aims to provide essential grain supplies, including to the countries in East Africa. Today's seminar provides us with a unique opportunity to explore how Ukraine and East African countries could work together to address the current, I very much hope, short and mid-term challenges as well as longer-term challenges. We shall ask ourselves, how can we leverage Ukrainian agricultural expertise and resources to support the food security needs in East African countries? What new avenues of cooperation can we develop to strengthen our partnership in the agri-food sector? And how can we ensure that our collaboration is not only effective, but also, which is very important, sustainable in all three forms of the sustainability, which are economic, social, and of course, environmental. To close, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you for your participation, and I look forward to the fruitful discussions, and I have no doubt about it, ahead today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mariia. I'll be quite short to provide more time for other speakers. And our current interest is Eastern Africa. We have already investigated agriculture and agri-food policy in Northern Africa, in the West Africa or ECOWAS countries. And for now, we are more focused on the east part of the continent, or particularly on Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya. So therefore, we need some vision from more experienced experts. So I I'll provide more time for other speakers. Artem, the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much. Yes, I am really proud to be present on this meeting. I'm not new in Africa. My experience started at 2014 from Dear Congo, and all these 10 years I spent in Africa, in Congo and Tanzania. Last year in October was founded a new state-owned company, Ukrainian-African Trade Mission. I'm director of this company, and let me introduce what we're trying to create, like a practical instrument for develop relationship between Ukraine and Africa. Just a second. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Our vision to create practical instrument which will be provide Ukrainian activities on African market and support Ukrainian businessmen to found good partners and make good activities on the market. On this time, we doing research and support for Ukrainian businessmen and African businessmen who want to do business with Ukraine, export and import operation. On the next stage, we want to create a showroom with all Ukrainian products. It's not just agricultural sector. All option what we have from Ukraine, we want to present for African businessmen with possibility to check the quality condition of the goods. On the next stage, we want to create a platform which will be provide all types of logistic and other services for Ukrainian companies and for African companies to make all types of logistic for delivering, consolidating of the goods, support with certification and other type of the official document which company need for export-import operation. And on the last step, we want to create huge company which will be present on the all African countries and support for all activities between Ukraine and African region. We already opened 3 representative offices in Kenya, Nigeria, and Tanzania. We have representative person, our regional directors, who has experience more than 10 years to live and doing business in that countries. They have good knowledges and good contacts with all community and trying to provide and explain all option and opportunities which Ukrainian agricultural sector and other sectors of Ukrainian economic could propose for development of African countries. On basis of trade mission, we want to create research center which will be support with all types of research, like from the land, because it's very difficult to understand all details and all problem for company if you are not present on the land. We want to create economic center which will be support for Ukrainian businessmen and African businessmen create investment projects, and we're going to support with investment research for these projects, and we want to support the joint ventures company between Ukrainian and African companies. Civil activities, we want to create educational center, cultural center, and separate, I hope, with our partners, we will create investment center, who will be which will be help with money for all these projects. Just a second. We want to be one stop shop for both way, for Ukrainian and African businessmen. All my team has experience in Africa from 10 until 15 years. And for us, Africa, it's not the word. For us, Africa, it's our mother, second mother. And we're trying to use all possibilities and all opportunities what Ukrainian knowledges and technologies could bring to Africa for development. One of the main problems what we could see right now, it's not enough information about African countries and about that option what Ukraine could bring to the continent. And we hope to be a practical instrument which could be used any company from Africa and any company from Ukraine. I hope on the second part of our discussion, it will be more question. I will be very happy to answer. And thank you one more time for invitation for this meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Artem. And so yes, each speaker will have about 5-7 minutes of notes, and then we will have some long panel discussion about the key questions regarding the East Africa. And our next speaker is Rita Polishuk, and Rita will tell us about Kenya market, right? So Rita, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello to everyone. Pavlo, thank you very much for the introduction. I just want to add shortly that now I am also working in rural opportunities activities in Ukraine as an expert for development of trade with Kenya. So just briefly, a few words about Kenya, about the market, and after that, during the discussion, I think we can discuss all the issues that we will have. So, as you know, Kenya stands as one of the most promising markets on the African continent, with a dynamic and multi-faced economy, and it's one of the key players in East Africa's regional economy, presenting immense potential for growth in both the agriculture sector and trade. And Kenya definitely is the largest economies in East Africa, driven by a robust economic growth and growth rate and diversified economic structure. Over recent years, the country has demonstrated remarkable growth, largely due to economic reforms, infrastructure investment, and sectoral diversification. If we are speaking about Kenya's agriculture sector, it remains a cornerstone of its economy, contributing 21% of GDP and employing over 40% of the workforce, particularly in rural areas. But beyond agriculture, Kenya has successfully developed sectors such as information and communication technologies, financial service, and tourism. Tourism, which have become critical contributors to the economy as well. As I said, agriculture accounts for like almost 65% of Kenya's export earnings, making it a critical sector for the nation in general. So key export products include tea, coffee, horticultural products like flowers and fruits, and which generate significant revenue to the country. For example, tea alone brings in over $1 billion annually, positioning Kenya as one of the largest global tea exporter. Despite its potential, the sector faces challenges like limited arable land, because only 20% is farmable, and the next problem is the stagnation of productivity. However, the opportunities abound in modernizing agriculture through technology and sustainable practice, just huge in the country. Especially, I would like to tell you about Kenya's development blueprint. I mean the Kenya's vision 2030 is an ambitious strategic plan aimed at transforming the country into a newly industrialized middle-income economy in East Africa. Agriculture plays like super important role in achieving food security and driving economic growth under this vision, with a focus on boosting productivity and increasing exports of some agriculture products. Vision 2030 also emphasizes key crops and livestock such as maize, tea, coffee, dairy, and meat products, which are essential for reducing imports and boosting exports. If we are speaking about opportunities for Ukrainian companies, or about development of relationship between Ukraine and Kenya in general, so we can talk about three main vectors. First of all, it's technological partnership. I mean collaborations in implementing modern agriculture technologies such as precision farming and irrigation system can significantly improve productivity in Kenya. The second option is different kind of joint ventures. Engaging in joint ventures with Kenya business to develop processing facilities and to create value-added products could be a lucrative opportunity for Ukrainian investors and producers. And the third option is export of agriculture machinery from Ukraine, because the demand for advanced agriculture equipment in Kenya present an excellent opportunity for Ukrainian companies specializing in machineries, fertilizers, and sustainable farming technology. So the main important thing that together we can harness the strengths of both nations to achieve mutual growth and prosperity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It seems that really Vision 2030 can fully reshape the local agriculture and local food demand in Kenya. So the important aspect of the cooperation between Ukraine and Africa are humanitarian programs, and in particular its Grain from Ukraine initiative. And I want to invite the Dr. Christopher Fomunio, the ambassador of Grain from Ukraine program. Dr. Fomunio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pavlo, for those very kind words and for the invitation to participate in this webinar with all of you. And Mariia, for your kind words also on the Grain from Ukraine initiative, where I'm one of the goodwill ambassadors. I have just 3 quick points to enrich our conversation, I hope. The first point is that I believe that Ukraine is uniquely positioned to be the first country that would engage in agricultural diplomacy with Africa. And that's very significant for me because when you look at the patterns of relationships between countries in the Northern Hemisphere and Africa, none of those relationships have really prioritized the position of agriculture and agricultural development. Of course, we have Western countries that are investing and have prioritized trade with African countries, but those trade lines are based on very pre-colonial or colonial era determined relationships where there's a lot of exploitation of raw materials from the continent. So even coffee and cocoa are grown on the continent, but they're exported in bulk. And then the finished materials are re-exported onto the African continent. Then we see China, for example, that has come with a very different model that is critical of the West, but basically replicating the same models that were implemented by European nations and that they were critical of, which consists of exploiting African raw materials and exporting them in bulk into China to harness the Chinese economy. And of course, we have Russia, which is probably the most negative actor in sense of there is nothing being supplied except weapons and machineries, because you can look at the African continent and you couldn't point to any one of the 54 countries where you would see development that has been driven because of bilateral relationships with Russia. So I think this focus on agricultural diplomacy is a very unique niche which Ukraine can define for itself, and that could find prosperity on the African continent and could resonate with Africans. Secondly, I would say that the continental body, the African Union itself has recognized the need to prioritize agriculture. And in one of its summits of African heads of states, a resolution was actually adopted that said that each African country or every African country must allocate at least 10% of their national budget on investments in agriculture. And so with a potential market of 1.4 billion people, investing in the agricultural sector is something that is worthwhile. It's something that's already being recognized by the African countries themselves. And then the third point that I would say is that Ukraine is already a leg up through the Grain from Ukraine initiative that has really focused on providing humanitarian assistance to stem food insecurity and to help populations that are vulnerable to famine or to extreme hunger. And that in the past 2 years, many countries in East Africa and the Horn have been beneficiaries of the Grain from Ukraine initiative. And that when you look at the cumulative deliveries that have been done to Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, and Kenya, that the aggregate figure is approximately 250,000 tons of grain that have been donated by Ukraine to these African countries. Of course, the initiative is still ongoing despite some of the challenges, logistical challenges that Ukraine faces because of the ongoing aggression and the war. But the hope is that as more and more African countries benefit from the initiative, the relationship of their engagement with Ukraine would change and they would have a better awareness of what it is Ukraine has to offer. And with those 3 points, I would just conclude by saying that, as Rita has described extremely well, I engage in this conversation with a lot of hope and promise about the future, because the potential is there that bilateral relationships between various African countries in East Africa and in other parts of the continent will be defined in ways that could be mutually beneficial to those countries and their populations, as well as to Ukraine, and will provide a platform for Ukraine to be recognized as a major a major partner for good on the African continent and for new opportunities to open up for both economic and institutional development across the continent. So thank you very much. I will leave my opening remarks at that, but I'll be open to engaging with our participants should specific questions come up with regards to the Grain from Ukraine initiative and other points that I've made. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Homunio. So our next speaker is Vladyslav Vlasiuk. Vladyslav, you're welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on this beautiful webinar. So I'll be very brief in underlining again. So we've been implementing this presidential humanitarian initiative named the Grain from Ukraine. To the date, we've managed to deliver at least 200,000 tons of wheat to different African countries, African Persian countries. Plus, those would be also thousands of some other products, including maize, including peas, and including vegetable oil. Altogether, that has been, I guess, now dozen of deliveries generously supported by some of different nations. I think it is now more than 30 nations supporting this initiative, and managed by the WFP, the World Food Program, who's been in charge of most of the purchases of the products within Ukraine and organizing the frachts and organizing the distribution of the cargo at the destiny point. This goes purely from the heart of Ukrainian people. We've experienced the horrors of the famine at least twice in the previous century. All of those was artificial, created by pro-Russian authorities. And we know perfectly well what it is when you do not have food to eat. And this is very important for us to keep the role of one of the leaders in terms of the global food security. And that's really, really great occasion for us to show our goodwill from in relation to the supporting the food security. So we don't really like when there are voices saying that, well, that's a difficult situation, that is a crisis in between Ukraine and Russia, that Ukraine is also kind of not doing enough to provide the food security. Well, I think that we've been making quite clear that the only one to blame it is not us, but the Russia, the crazy authority and Putin. And second, that we've been doing quite a lot to be able to secure the food security and to fulfill our contracts. One of the great stories about the grain from Ukraine, apart from the numbers, it is that the Russians started to do the same. So they've tried to deliver a couple of cargoes to certain African countries like Mali and DRC. So they kind of, recognizing that the grain from Ukraine has been very successful. We have been also the privilege to have our esteemed goodwill ambassadors like Chris Fomunia and some others. So this is now 8 goodwill ambassadors from different countries working pro bono to help us to promote this initiative, so more deliveries can be secured to more destinations. One of the challenges, and I'm very candid with you, it was and it has been that sometimes the receiving side, the governments of the part of the countries, are kind of reluctant due to the influence of Russia, even though the mere facts of these deliveries are purely humanitarian and they have nothing to do with any kind of politics whatsoever. But yet, you know, sometimes our ambassadors on the ground are just sending back to the capital signals. Yeah, we'll be in touch with the government. They're kind of ready to receive, but they're a little bit reluctant because the Russians told them, you're not gonna receive anything from Ukraine. So these are some political issues, and we understand that it has been difficult, it has been mixed. But again, I think that altogether, Ukraine has been showing a lot of goodwill. We've opened 10 new embassies across African continent. We've delivered a lot of cargoes, and we plan to deliver even more cargoes with wheat, with vegetable oil, with maize, with peas, to new African destinations. The next will be, I guess, Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, and some others. Me personally will be really glad to hear two things. First, what it is the feedback, or what is the how the reception of the grain from Ukraine is across different countries in Africa. And second, do you think that we can improve in some ways our program? Again, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vladislav. It seems that such humanitarian programs is one of the keys for the long-term cooperation between Ukraine and African countries. So the vision of our colleagues from the EU is quite important for us. I want to invite Dr. Heinz Strubenhoff.
Yeah,
So,
thanks, Pavlo. Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the Ukrainian countryside, so I hope the line holds. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I like the topic of the webinar very much, because I'm personally convinced that Ukraine can learn a lot from African countries, and African countries can learn a lot from Ukraine. Concerning myself, I worked in Ukraine for a couple of years for the International Finance Corporation, World Bank. I worked in the Horn of Africa, based in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa, a couple of years. So I very much like this connection between Africa and Ukraine. Currently, I'm involved in some investments in agriculture and agribusiness in Africa. And last year, I've been to Tanzania. And in Tanzania, we invested, among other things, in a grain mill. And it is always a pleasure to see when a plan materializes and you see that the grain mill is working. And it's also a great pleasure to talk to the owners and the CEOs about the operations. And in this grain mill, we had wheat processed. So I asked the owner where the wheat comes from. And he said the wheat comes from Ukraine. So he purchased it on the market. It was not part of the Grain from Ukraine initiative, which is humanitarian. It was a commercial purchase. And then my second question was, why don't you produce the wheat yourself instead of importing it? And he said, we would like to do that. And we think to invest in farming, in wheat farming, in maize farming. The problem is that our productivity is so low, so the yields are 2 to 3 tons per hectare, which is not sufficient to make it profitable. So we invited professional farm managers from South Africa to manage our farm. Now, so yeah, one option would be to invite Ukrainian farm managers. They know how to grow wheat and how to produce 7 to 8 tons per hectare. And he said, yeah, but the problem is that I don't know how to select them, how to connect to these guys. So I'm very pleased that we have a kind of a private trade mission established. Usually in an embassy, you have agriculture attaches. In many embassies in the world, you have many European countries have agriculture attaches. The main role is to play a positive role for investors from that country, but also for investors and traders from the host country. So I'm very happy that there is a private initiative in Ukraine doing this, because this is extremely important, so that you have the links between the African business people and the Ukrainian business people, so that they know the potential and what's happening. I will give you a second example, what I experienced in Addis Ababa. So I was based there 3 years. It was very good times, and we had several investments. And I remember that there was a trade mission coming from Ukraine, from a very famous, one of the biggest chicken meat producers. And we organized a round table where the Ethiopians were very much surprised that you can produce chicken meat for $2 to $3 a kilo, because their production costs were $7 to $8 per kilo. Yeah, so there is a huge potential in this case, a learning potential, and also a business case for collaboration. When it comes to the EU, I think the Ukraine and the African countries have a similar problem with the EU. The EU is very keen to insist on certain standards, on sustainability standards of the supply chains, quality standards, food safety standards. That's sometimes a problem. I give you a third example. We were a few months ago, we were discussing in the investment committee of the Africa Fund, where I'm involved in, an investment in coffee in Uganda. And that was a very, very promising investment. The problem was that there were 2,000 to 3,000 smallholder coffee growers, and the company had to show to the EU where the coffee comes from, the whole supply chain. They had to geolocate all the farms of the smallholders. So this is sometimes a real challenge, because the EU is, and the Ukrainians suffer at the moment, because you have to adopt all the legal requirements of the EU as an accession candidate country. So this is really hard work. African countries, sometimes when they trade with the EU, have the same problem. So that's also one area of potential collaboration. So in short, I have two recommendations to make when it comes to collaboration between Ukraine and Africa. One is established at the embassies. I know that Ukraine has only 10 embassies in Africa, but there are more than 50 countries. So then you need embassies in more countries. Especially, I think there is one in Nairobi, there's one in Dar es Salaam, which is good. But there is also an embassy in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, which is also good. But there is no embassy yet at the African Union. The African Union is based in Addis Ababa. The African Union is very keen on prioritizing agriculture. And I think it would be a good idea to think about representation of the Ukraine at the African Union in Addis Ababa. And I think that's my recommendation. The other things have been mentioned already. There's a lot of technological exchange that can take place. Not only from Ukraine to Africa. I think when you come to Kenya, what is really surprising is that you go to a very remote area And every farmer in the remote area is connected to financial markets through the M-Pesa system, through the mobile money system. Ukraine is also very good, much better than my home country, Germany, for instance, in digitalization of the financial markets. But there's also some areas where you have, let's say, good collaboration basis for digital farming. And digital farming in Africa sounds a bit strange, because food security comes first, and the priority is to feed the people. But digital farming, like digital finance, can help to reach the poor. So this is my second recommendation. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I like the format. I like what you are doing. I like what I have heard of the grain from Ukraine initiative. I like this trade mission private initiative. So happy to collaborate in future with you on areas that might come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your vision. Indeed, the political triangle EU, Ukraine, and Africa need to be considered during the rebuilding of Ukrainian-Africa relationships. And you have mentioned Ethiopia, so I want to invite Dr. Abule Mehare from Ethiopian Economic Association. Dr. Mehare.
Thank you very much, Pavlo. I'm very much thrilled to be here and share our perspective. I'm working at the Ethiopian Economics Association. Our association is one of the prominent professionals association. It's also a think tank working on policy research. And we really provide information and evidence for informed policy decision. So this Ukraine-Africa, especially East African relationship seminar is a very good start. I hope it will bear fruits in a very near future because there is a very strong tie between these two economies, the East African economy, because as my Kenyan colleague and the previous speaker was talking about, we import a lot of agricultural products from Ukraine amid the huge potential of the country. We didn't even cultivate even 15% of what is available in the arable land in Ethiopia. But we do have more than 10 million households looking for direct food assistance. So this calls for a serious reform, especially in the agricultural sector, where Ukraine has a very rich experience in modernizing the agriculture, mechanized agriculture, and ensure the food sovereignty of this continent, as well as the East Africa region, and particularly Ethiopia. So I believe this is also, for us, it's a good timing because as you hear from news here and there, we are in the verge of, we are in the area of reform where we are getting toward this market-oriented economy where the private sector plays a lot of role in transforming our economy, where this also calls for a strong partnership with institutions and private sector and direct investment from countries like Ukraine with a very rich experience in the agricultural sector. Therefore, I believe now because of the conflict now in our country, at the same time that side is really impacting our economy and also specifically the food price. For instance, the food price for the last 2-3 years, food price for most of the most important imported commodities, like for instance, the price of wheat in Ethiopia increased by 35%, which is actually a staple, I can say, kind of staple for small orders and low-income groups in the country. So this tells us there is a huge potential in modernizing our agriculture to curb this kind of food price hikes, because the food price hike in Ethiopia is because of the mismatch between the demand and supply. And, we are very much import oriented or dependent on importers, and we are importing even wheat. But we do have that capacity and to produce within, with the help of, or with collaboration of investors from abroad, like countries from like Ukraine and
we have some issues with connection, maybe. So let's wait a minute.
ground and
Okay, and meanwhile we will switch to the next speaker, and from Tanzania, Dr. Makarius Mdemu. The floor is yours. You are muted. Please turn on your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for having me in this platform. I think it's very useful and important initiative for collaboration between East Africa and Ukraine. I'll focus my introduction on the agriculture sector, which is, I think, is the main theme for this discussion. As you introduced me, I work for Artem University, so one of the public universities in Tanzania. We do not focus on agriculture in the training, so but we have, because we touch about environment, we touch about land use planning, we touch about land. Definitely agriculture comes in, but that is an area that personally I've been working for over 10 years, although also I focus on agriculture water management, as you mentioned. So we consider the country has a lot of potential in terms of agriculture development. First, in terms of the arable land, which the country has. So it has about 44 million arable land. Out of that, it's only about 35%, which is has been put into agriculture. So we still have quite a land which can be cultivated. And agriculture is one of the important sectors in the country, despite the fact that we see other sectors are coming up, but its importance remains significantly. One, because the sector employs about 67% of the population. So overall, but when you go to rural areas, then it's more than 70% of the population is employed in agriculture. One important aspect also to mention, which I think also contrasts with Ukrainian agriculture, is that 85% of the agriculture production, particularly food, is produced by smallholder farmers. And then you have a small percentage which is covered by a large scale or commercial agriculture, and that is mainly focuses on commercial crops like coffee, tea, tobacco, and those kind of commodities. The other important feature is that 90% of agriculture production is mainly rain-fed. So that is very important. We have a significant potential for developing irrigation. So the estimate is that about 29 million hectares can be developed for irrigation, but those have been categorized into high potential, medium, and low potential. So the high potential is about 2.3 hectares, and then medium potential is about 4.8 million hectares. But the development of irrigation as of now is less than 1 million hectares. So just around 0.73 million hectares which have been developed. So the sector contributes about 27% of the national GDP. It also contributes to 30% of the export or the foreign exchange. It also contributes 65% of the raw materials that are needed in the industries. Yeah, so as I mentioned, despite that, other sectors are coming up. So you realize that agriculture is important because it employs majority of the population. And when you talk about poverty reduction or food security, so you are talking about the majority of the rural population that needs to be lifted. So as a country, we have developed what is called the agroecological zones, matching the climate and the biology to see what crops can be produced. And then those agroecological zones leads into what we call farming systems. So we have about 10 of them. And then from those farming systems, you have diverse agro-food systems. In terms of main food crop production, so we have sufficient production, except for wheat. So we have a gap for wheat. We have also gaps for millet and finger millet. And then in terms of other commercial business crops, so like things like coffee, tea, cashew nuts, and so forth, usually the targets are higher than what we can actually achieve. We also have gaps for sugarcane, which is used to produce the sugar. But the government is putting up effort to make sure that we have self-sufficiency. So at the moment, we have a gap of about 190,000 tons of sugar. The same applies for oily crops. So we still, I think, import a little bit about of oil, maybe about 20,000 metric tons. But for the last 3 years, the government has put a strategy on sunflower production as one of the strategic crops so that we have sufficient oil. So I'll not talk now in terms of policies. but I'll highlight a little bit about the many challenges. Some of those challenges have been highlighted by other speakers. So low productivity is one of them. So when you read, I think, literature, you find that land productivity is very low, less than maybe 3 tons per hectare. And that main problem is also associated with lack or inadequate access to capital for farming. If you talk about technology, you need money. If you need fertilizers, you need money. And the majority of smallholder farmers are not able to access, but also the conditions to allow them to access financing is very cumbersome. It's a little bit now financing, microfinancing are opening up, but we cannot say that capital is readily or easily accessible. There are issues about markets and the price fluctuations, which affect the prices, the profitability. And that is also linked to the aspect of transport. So the transport infrastructures, especially during the rainy season. So while you may have enough agricultural commodities or produce, the imbalance of distribution because of transport can equally affect food security. Then there are issues about climate change, which we are seeing, and that particularly in terms of farming. So it has affected the timing, how you cannot predict that the rainy season is starting. You are also not sure when the rains will stop. And then in addition to that, you have frequent droughts that have affected the crops. And the other time when you have floods that sweeps away the crops that farmers have planted. The aspect about value addition is very significant. So we have very little value addition in what is produced. And then you have other issues about the extension services, the low investment in irrigation. Of course, we need research and development. That does not mean to say that research and development is not being done, but it is required in a number of fronts. And then just to add on some areas that we can think about in terms of cooperation. So research for development is one of them. And particularly here, the right mix of land use, policies, and incentives to optimize productive land so that agriculture can be profitable. The second area, which I think is also very relevant and which has been also mentioned by other speakers, is capacity building. So the areas of value addition, issues of quality control have been highlighted. And then the knowledge and technical skills exchange, but also technology transfer and adaptation of the technology to the local context. I think that's very important because what it means that not every technology which maybe has been successful in one area can directly be transferred. Maybe it needs to be adapted to the existing conditions. So I will contribute more, I think, during the discussion sessions, if given the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for very comprehensive notes. And indeed, growing sunflower in Tanzania is quite interesting case, I would say. It's quite relevant for Ukrainian agriculture.
Okay.
And indeed, we can expect that Tanzanian agriculture will be consolidated to larger farms in the nearest future. It might be the case. It is quite good implications for the investors on this market. But I hope we will have time to discuss it during the panel session, and we will have approximately 30 minutes for panel discussion. And Mariia, you will ask the questions, and I will add some smaller questions if needed. So let's start.
Pavlo, thank you very much. My first question would probably be to all speakers in general, and it will be very direct. What do you think our governments, the Ukrainian government and the government of the countries' representatives that are here, should do to enhance the cooperation and the collaboration between our agricultural stakeholders, businesses, and research, and everyone who is involved? Probably someone, maybe Dr. Demu could answer this question first, or Dr. Strubenhoff.
Yes, I can. Maybe I can just chip in on that. So usually what I see is that you need to have some government agreements, maybe memorandum of understanding between the government of Tanzania and Ukraine, and that will generally highlight areas of cooperations. So once that has been set up, then it invites private sector research organization or research institutions to have collaboration. So it opens up the doors for collaboration at various levels. So I would think so. I mean, some sort of government-to-government maybe engagement that opens up doors for other cooperation aspects to take place. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Strubenhoff, do you have anything to add?
Oh, you can say, Heinz, that's okay. I would recommend to have agriculture attaches in the embassies, in the Ukrainian embassies in Africa, and in the African embassies in Ukraine, because these are connectors and they are very important. So the Dutch, the French, the Germans, the Americans, they all have such a guy at the embassy. And when I go, for example, for German investor, for the German government to another country, I have a person at the German embassy who sits there for a couple of years, knows the sector very well, the country very well, and he talks to potential investors and business people. And when it comes to interest of certain business associations, then he may organize trade missions. So invite traders from his country or her country to the host country. And I'm very happy that Ukraine launched this private initiative of the trade mission company. So in principle, if an agriculture attaché in all embassies in Africa for Ukraine would be very costly, but you can privatize it. I think that's a very good option. And this is a very important first step to have a connector established. Otherwise, the regular communication flow will be difficult. And then connector may then also organize visits, exchange visits, where you have delegations coming from Kenya or from Tanzania or from Ethiopia to Ukraine, and delegations coming from Ukraine to these countries, so that business people all over the world, they don't like very much to rely on research papers. Yeah, they want to go to a certain place where they may invest themselves. They want to see the place, and they want to decide themselves. So the exchange visits are very important. So if I were advisor to the Ukrainian government, I would say invest in agriculture attaches. At least at the 10 most important countries in Africa, you should have a person who would be there. He could that could be very important, and then invest in exchange visits with African countries so that you establish business relations. And so without cost, it's very difficult to establish business. So these are my two recommendations.
Thank you. I think both answers are excellent. Maybe Mr. Artem Gudkov or Ms. Polishuk could answer too.
Yeah, let me add a little bit. I agree with Mr. Strubinhoff because we already staying a long time in Africa and we understand how it works. And one of the main reasons of creating Ukrainian-African trade mission, it was like practical instrument. And as well, we're ready to organize like business trips for Ukrainian businessmen and for African businessmen. I agree, nobody want to looking for research documents. Everybody want to touch and feel in reality how it looks. Like last visit, Ukrainian delegation to Nigeria, the people who traveled there, they could see their own how it looks from inside the country. And when they returned back, they have a lot of ideas how they could implement their own businesses inside Nigeria. And we're planning to organize these business trips for both ways, but we try and go step by step, and maybe soon we could organize visit to Tanzania and tell habari zakazi to our friends in Tanzania, in Ethiopia and Kenya. A lot of interest from Ukrainian side, a lot of interest from African side, and anyway, without activities from business, it will be very difficult to create good relationship in government to government relationship, because anyway, businessmen should move this process. If businessmen don't have interest and don't understand how it should work, government could create a lot of option what to do, but we will not have the people who will do it by their own hands.
Thank you very much, Artem. Pavlo, do you have anything to add here?
So far not. We can ask other question.
Yes, Mariia. Yes, just a short comment from my side. I definitely agree with all previous speakers about establishing bilateral agreements about strength diplomatic ties. If we're speaking about high-level visit or embassy expansion as well, or agriculture attaché, definitely. But the most important thing from my side is to stop speaking and start doing at least something. Because like Ukraine has recently proposed establishing grain hubs at Kenya ports to help address East African food shortage and mitigate price fluctuation caused by logistical disruption. Still, we proposed, and it was few level of negotiation between the governments of Ukraine and Kenya, but we are still keep talking and we are not doing something. That is the main problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. hard to add anything to what Ms. Polishuk just said. I have another question though to integration of Ukraine into the EU. Would you envision or see any potential challenges or reverse opportunities for the cooperation between Ukraine and East African countries within this process of Ukraine's integration into the EU? Any speaker could be invited to elaborate.
I'm not sure whether you are asking whether when Ukraine has been integrated into EU, it will affect the collaboration. So I think, to me, I do not foresee that. I'm not very sure the logistical arrangement when you become a member of EU, because usually EU have their EU representatives within countries, but you still have embassies. So there are issues that are handled as EU collaborative, but again, you have other aspects of collaborations that are between countries. So for me, I mean, in general terms, I would not see that as a problem unless it is within the EU conditions that when you become member of EU, then there are things that are handled under EU. That means you cannot collaborate as a country, but it's part of EU. So this is what I see, but I don't have the details actually to pinpoint.
I would add the additional question to Heinz. We see that the EU accession of Ukrainian agriculture will create some additional compliance costs for our producers. And this means that our production costs will be much higher when we will join the EU. And this means automatically that we will be less competitive on some African markets.
Okay.
So how to coincide these two opposite forces, the higher compliance costs during the Euro integration and the competitive trade with African markets?
I don't see a real problem by the EU accession of Ukraine in the trade. There might be some areas for food safety standards also where it becomes a bit more difficult. But African countries who are trading with the EU, they know this already. I mentioned this case, this investment case of a coffee processor from Uganda. And the coffee goes to Switzerland, to England, and to the EU. And the EU wants, and Switzerland and England also, to know where the coffee comes from. So they have to comply with the standards of the EU when this trader would like to sell the coffee on European markets. So that's now for the competitiveness question. I agree that the compliance costs will increase a bit, especially for the livestock sector, not so much for the grains and oilseeds, because Ukraine is today exporting to the whole world, including to the EU already. So most of the standards, the Ukrainian standards are met. So most of the EU standards are met by the Ukrainian producers and traders. In the livestock sector, it's a bit more difficult. When it comes to meat and dairy, it's a bit more difficult, and the compliance costs may increase. But it's a long way that the production costs for chicken meat increase from $2.50 to $3.50 or to the Ethiopian level of $6 or $7 per kilo, that's unlikely. So, and if you compare the production costs for maize or for wheat in Ukraine with the production costs in Tanzania, Kenya, and Ethiopia, then it is cheaper to produce in Ukraine. And then you lose a bit of competitiveness, but the general competitiveness of Ukraine will still remain. The question is whether you can supply all the products to all African countries. So it's a difference whether you supply wheat to Dar es Salaam, to the port, or to the port locations of Kenya, or to Addis Ababa. If you would like to sell wheat to an importer from Addis Ababa, you have to bring it to Djibouti first, and then from Djibouti to the dry port in Addis, which adds $100 to your trading costs, which may be a bit difficult. That's why it makes a lot of sense to produce wheat in Ethiopia, and to help the Ethiopians to produce enough grains and oilseeds, because you have the logistics costs on top. I would not say that this is prohibitive, because even now Ethiopia is importing a few million tons of cereals per year, and it's all coming from Djibouti at this time. So even the $100 plus logistics cost is not really is decreasing the competitiveness of Ukrainian agriculture. Ukrainian agriculture will remain the most competitive agriculture in the world. The problem with the Ukrainian agriculture is that you don't have the food industry developed, the food processing, the aggregating. If you compare the Ukrainian production structure with European countries, for instance, then you see in European countries, almost half of the production comes from value addition, mostly livestock, but also other sectors, fruit, horticulture, and half of the value addition comes from the commodities. In Ukraine, almost 90% of the value that is produced in agriculture comes from primary commodities, from cereals and oilseeds. Only 10 to 15% comes from the food industry. There are some sectors which are really good in Ukraine and advanced, including the sunflower oil production and the chicken meat production and the egg production. But there are vast areas where you can invest a lot in Ukraine. And this will make Ukraine also competitive in food industry markets, in meat markets, in dairy markets. So don't be afraid of the EU accession. The EU accession of Ukraine will not undermine the competitiveness of Ukraine. It will, of course, increase the compliance cost, more in the livestock sector, not so much in the crop sector. But it's a good step, because then with the application of all EU standards, Ukraine has access to 500 million consumers, and now even with the trade agreement with the EU, the EU is very, very keen to promote their own farmers. The European Commission, when they negotiate with the Ukrainian government, is very keen to protect the European farmers. The EU accession will lift that. So that's a free accession to 500 million consumers, and the Ukrainian agriculture will remain competitive. That's the major threat. When I talk to my relatives in Germany, German farmers, their major concern is the competitiveness of Ukrainian farms and the agricultural sector. So don't be afraid. You won't lose the competitiveness. Now, during the war, of course, we have higher logistics costs. The input prices for fertilizers and chemicals are higher. The transport costs are higher. So it's very difficult to make money. I hope this year shows a bit better picture than the last 2 years during the war. But when the war is over one day, Ukraine will be in business again, and farmers will make money in agriculture.
Thank you very much for all of the answers. Can I have another question, Pavlo?
Yes, it is quite good and interesting point about processing food products. However, usually the import taxes for processed food products are much more higher than for raw commodities. And this is especially pronounced for the Eastern African countries, because we have some East African community which protect own market, and actually the East African community is the most protectionist regional union on the African continent, compared, for example, to ECOWAS, which is more open to other countries. So, and we see some protectionism of particularly Kenya and Tanzania, and how the existence of such East African community and high import rates affect and will affect in the nearest future the trade between the region and Ukraine. And the second question here is, can we expect that this protection will shift us towards non-trade relationships, where there will be some common enterprises inside Kenya, inside Tanzania, inside other countries, which will process food commodities inside these countries? So this is the question.
Yeah, so maybe to respond, Pavlo, so the first thing is that the level of processing of most agricultural commodities is very low. And that has affected the value chain, but also the profitability that goes, of course, you will not say to the farmers, but those who are involved in the value chains. Now, I think one reason for what you see as a protection is the worry to those maybe few processors who have invested in the country. And especially when it happens that imports, so imported processed maybe food is cheaper than the local. For example, that has happened, and it happens in for some of the products. So, for example, milk which is maybe packaged from South Africa, will sell less costly than locally. So you have those kind of situation, and I think the policy, the government policies in the region is to protect the local investment, but usually they allow the threshold which cannot be supplied by the local market to be imported. So I think what is important here is would be to see what, for example, what products that are not locally produced or are locally produced, but you still have the production does not meet the demand. And then I think for other things, for example, like if you talk about meat products, so really we do not have, there isn't any processing, for example, in Tanzania to add value. So largely, if you have cattle, livestock, they'll be slaughtered and then meat is sold. If there is any, for example, packaging or production of meat products that are processed is very little. Very little. So I think the issue here is to see what kind of products really they are still needed, which are processed, and I think the market is still there.
Okay, are there any opinions from other speakers?
Let me add a little bit. You know, the protection is not bad. According to the protection, Tanzania and like previous period, Nigeria and Tanzania was totally dependent from the import of poultry production from poultry. The similar situation with other sensitive goods. You know, the government trying to create good opportunities for investors who are ready to produce and to build manufacturing inside the country, because like a huge part of the import in all African countries, it's food and food commodities, and they're doing everything to protect their own nation from all changes what has become in the world. And food security, it's good for us, but African people feeling what it means in reality when, for example, Kenyan government, Nigerian government, for short term they cancel the import taxes because people didn't have enough money to buy like sensitive food products on the market. And the main point, how Ukraine will find our own role in all this game, because it's not problem protection. We need to become a part of value chain inside and integrate Ukrainian business inside the countries, African countries, and we will be local players, and we will be happy to have protection from local government for our initiative and for our joint ventures company, for our private companies. Just the main point, where is Ukraine on this map? What we are going to do? We will be just commodities seller, supplier, or we will be one of the main player of food or guarantor of food security in Africa. This is our choice, what we're going to do. And from our side, from Trade Mission, we're trying to change the situation and create option for Ukrainian businessmen to choose what they're going to do on the market, just trading or maybe something more. Because every year African countries to increase taxes and duties for different types of the products, and all this process depend how many new companies open inside the countries, and they're trying to protect them.
May I add to this? So I would agree. I would agree that protection as such is not always bad. It is, however, bad when the protection is not based on a certain long-term strategy where investors can count on. For investors, is not the import tariff the problem. The problem is that the tariff rates can be changed in a short term. So the predictability is important for investors, because the investor wants to have a certain stable framework for the time of his investment. And when it comes to investments in the food industry, it's a period of usually 7 to 8 years, even in Africa. So for this period, he needs a stable framework condition and a predictability. And I want to give you a real world example from Ethiopia. where I visited a spaghetti factory some years ago, and the investor from Ethiopia invested about $10 million in the latest Italian technology for the spaghetti factory. When the spaghetti factory was ready, the Ethiopian government introduced an import tariff for hard wheat, arguing that there are enough Ethiopian farmers who could produce the hard wheat. But that was not the case, because producing hard wheat for spaghetti is a special business, and there was no one in Ethiopia producing the hard wheat for the investor. So when I visited the factory was empty, was not producing. So the $10 million invested didn't produce any value. So I would agree that protection is good, but predictability is better.
Okay, good point. So we have time for the last question, and we already have some list of options for cooperation. And the last question: what is the perspective sectors in agriculture could be more actively involved into the trade and non-trade cooperation between Ukraine and particularly East African countries? What are the primary sectors of agriculture? Dr. Mdemo, do you have any insights about sectoral division?
Yes, so in terms of sectors that, so if we look, for example, areas of export for crops in Tanzania. So we have we say the traditional commercial crops, but those that I think are largely regulated by the market in the world. So if you talk about coffee, tea, cotton, and those kind of things. But we have, I think, emerging crops, the horticulture. You mentioned about flowers. So the flower industry was seriously affected during COVID. So the business really, it's almost like collapsed. And if those who want to invest now will like be starting. But the horticulture industry is one of the areas which is coming up. So particularly fruits, and then green vegetables. And we have a horticulture associations of Tanzania. So it has been opening up the export market for these agricultural commodities. In terms of maybe what could come, I mean, from Ukraine to Tanzania. So like we said, maybe the oil industry, so sunflower or seeds that can produce the oil, and in that particular case, oil, food oil, I would see, I think, one of the area, although I think countrywide. So there are those initiatives to make sure that we are self-sufficient in terms of oil productions as a feed. But I think, again, like I said, the flower industry, I'm not sure whether it's going to be revived soon, but this is also an area, I think, an area of interest in terms of collaboration. So I think those are a few I could think of now, but I think there could be others that maybe we can explore depending on when you have, I think we have maybe sufficient or adequate information.
Okay, thank you. And any insights?
Sorry, Pavlo. Santosana, Dr. Ndemo. You know, you asked the question which don't have correct answer because it depends from the side where you're looking on this question. Because
Yes.
from, for example, from the Ukrainian government side, it will be one list of the sectors. From from Tanzania and other countries of Africa, it will be other list of the sectors.
Yeah.
From the side of Ukrainian businessmen, it will be another list of the sectors and businesses. From Tanzanian businessmen, it will be another list.
Sure.
Nobody have the answer on your question because it's every time depend what we trying to get to, like a result at the end of all these activities. And who trying to choose the sectors.
Can I add to that? I think that's a very good remark. I'm an old man now, 40 years in agribusiness, and I've seen more than 50 countries in my work, and I've rarely seen that a government selecting the sectors was successful. So even in East Africa, the successful investment stories in the flower sectors in Ethiopia and in Kenya, that was not really based on government strategy, that was based on the initiative of investors, of business people who just did it. So I think when it comes to selecting sectors, I think business people who invest their own money, they are the best the best people who can forecast a certain development because they are taking their own risk. And we shouldn't underestimate the capacities of entrepreneurs and business people and companies to come up with these ideas if you let them. What governments can do and what researchers can do is to help them to calculate, for instance, the domestic resource costs. So to have an idea about the comparative advantage, or to look at value chains. And in the let's say approach of Michael Porter, to say, okay, what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths of a certain value chain in country X? This you can do. You can also calculate import and export parity prices to have a certain idea. Is this a product? Is this a sector that makes sense to invest in? Or shall we, as Tanzanians or Kenyans or Ethiopians, invest in this sector or not? So this you can do, but you can, I think, I would agree to Vadim, that's very difficult to select certain sectors and then ask business people to come and to invest in these sectors and to develop partnerships or joint ventures. I think this I've rarely seen during the last 40 years. So a little bit more trust in the private sector, in the capacity of farmers, in the capacity of agribusiness entrepreneurs. That is very important. And this is where you see, let's say, better performance in Africa, where governments are a bit less involved. And Tanzania is not a good example, my friend, because you are coming from a socialist past, and the government thinks that you should control and steer the entrepreneurs. But the opposite is right. If you let loose, if you trust the private sector, the entrepreneurs, to make the right decisions with their own money, then you will have the success.
Okay, thank you. So that's it. Mariia, do you want to have closing remarks.
Thank you, Pavlo, for the excellent question that brought us to the excellent conclusion of this seminar, which was said by Dr. Heinz Strubenhoff. Thanks a lot.
So, thank you very much for the participation, and the East African region is quite important for us for both humanitarian point of view and also for trade, for non-trade cooperation, and the results of this seminar will be included into our report from KSE Agrocenter, which we write right now. So, and thank you very much, and see you later.
Thank you.
So
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Asante Santo.
Tutaonana bwana.